Welcome to the Climate Book Review. The Climate Book Review is a radio show and podcast featuring book reviews and reading lists for fiction, nonfiction, and poetry with climate themes. The Climate Book Review airs every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Central on WDBX 91.1 FM, solar-powered community radio for Southern Illinois. Yes, it's solar-powered even on rainy days. You can also find the show online at wdbx.org, climatebookreview.com, and on your favorite podcast app or site. The Climate Book Review is hosted by me, Tree Song. The two main segments of the show are the Climate Book of the Week and the Climate Reading List of the Week. If you have any suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. Now it's time for the Climate Book of the Week. This week's Climate Book of the Week is Imagine 2200, the 2025 collection. Now, we have spoken about that before on this show, but it was last time we spoke about it was a bit of a teaser. I had not read all of the stories in it, and so we were just teasing with the general concept of it. Now I've got my full review ready for you. So what is this whole thing? For 4 years and counting, a nonprofit climate journalism site called GRIST has run an amazing climate fiction contest called Imagine 2200. In January of the previous year, GRIST announced January of this year is when they announced it. GRIST announced the 2025 winners of this contest. You can read the winning stories for free at Imagine 2200, the 2025 collection on the GRIST website, grist.org. Now that the full collection is available and I've had a chance to review it, I am pleased to share my review. I normally only review published print books and ebooks, not web-based short story collections like this. But since this is such an important collection, I'm going to review it now rather than waiting to see if they turn it into a published book, which they very likely will. They've done that the past couple of times. So what is Imagine 2200? It's a climate fiction contest that invites new and independent writers to submit short stories that imagine what the future will look like if and when climate solutions are implemented. As a longtime GRIST reader and climate fiction author and reviewer, I've been following Imagine 2200 from the beginning. This contest and the resulting short story collections have become my favorite way to find new climate fiction short stories and share them with the world. So far, there have been 4 Imagine 2200 contests. After each contest, they announce the winners and make the winning stories available to read for free on their website. In addition to the wonderful fiction itself, each story features beautiful artwork inspired by the story. They've also published 2 of the sets of winning stories as short fiction collections that are available in paperback and ebook formats. So if you're more of a read it in an official published format person than a web-based reading person, they've got Afterglow, Climate Fiction for Future Ancestors, and also Metamorphosis, Climate Fiction for a Better Future. So what makes this whole thing, this Imagine 2200, so special? Really, any good climate fiction contest would have a special place in my heart. Years ago, I was obsessed with the Everything Changed contest and its resulting short story anthologies. They came out with 3 of those. I still recommend them and appreciate their contributions to the genre of climate fiction. You can read them for free at the Imagination and Climate Futures Initiative at ASU. But Imagine 2200 isn't just another broad climate fiction contest. Their focus on cultural diversity, queer representation, and creative climate solutions to the climate crisis sets them apart from any other climate fiction contest or publication I've seen. We aim to showcase stories of creative climate solutions. And here's a quote about what they do. We aim to showcase stories of creative climate solutions and community-centered adaptations, with an emphasis on uplifting voices and cultures from the communities most impacted by the climate crisis. Imagine 2200 is an invitation to writers and readers alike to imagine a future in which solutions to the climate crisis flourish and help bring about radical improvements to our world. Inspired by Afrofuturism, as well as Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, disabled, feminist, and queer futurisms, Imagine is also grounded in hope punk and solar punk, literary genres that uplift equitable climate solutions and continued service to one's community, even in the face of despair. So that is a quote from Chris.org there about the Imagine 2200 series. And that captures so much of what I like about this series, and this collection and the series in particular. So what are some of the stories included in this collection? The last time I talked about this, I just had the little snippets that they described them to go on. But since then, I have read and enjoyed all of these stories, and they are quite powerful and moving. The collection features 12 climate fiction stories. This includes the stories that won first, second, and third place in the contest, along with the top other 9 runners-up. Personally, I enjoy reading all of the stories. If you're looking for stories on a more specific topic or theme, though, then these detailed summaries may help you a little bit with deciding where to start. So let me say a little bit about each of these stories. And it's pretty rare for a collection in a review to go into each story in depth, but I've got the full review of that book here. If you email me at info@climatebookreview.com, I can send the text version of this your way. So the first story is Meet Me Under the Molokia. I can see why this one won first place. It's set in Lebanon in a future where the world is recovering from ecological and social destruction caused by colonialism, industrial pollution, and other ills. In this story, a young seed researcher encounters a mysterious spirit out in the Molokia fields during the course of her research. The story touches on her cultural and religious background, the queer relationships and identities in her life, and the scientific research and remediation practices of her work. It somehow manages to be both understated and profound in its exploration of culture, love, sense of place, and ecological remediation. And let me tell you, as an author myself, trying to fit all of those themes into one story, it is quite impressive that they came out with a wonderful story that includes all of that. Next story, Last Tuesday for Eternity. Intelligent robots are a staple of science fiction, but most climate fiction doesn't include them. Last Tuesday for Eternity is a sweet, remarkably creative, and thought-provoking tale about a human and a robot couple, and their coming to terms with both their emerging love and their different relationships to death and dying. You can imagine a robot may have a very different relationship to that than a human. This is one of the few robot stories I've read that situates the potential immortality of artificial consciousness in the context of ecological sustainability. That's a fancy way of saying, robots live forever. What does that mean for sustainability? The resulting story is both a touching love story and a thoughtful reflection on life, death, and natural cycles. So the next story on the list is Mouse Deer versus Ghost Ships. This was a really fun one. It centers around the plucky crew of a ship called Mouse Deer, operating in the coastal waters of Southeast Asia in the future. They spend their days gathering necessary supplies, supporting the ecological recovery of the region, and fending off the ghost ships. Now, these ghost ships are automated boats that sail the ocean looking for resources to extract. This is one of those cases where I'm worried that this is going to inspire real-life ships with the dystopian version that they're presenting here. But in this future, in this story, there are these ghost ships that are roaming because they've been sent off automated to harvest resources. Despite the post-collapse setting, though, there are plenty of high-tech gadgets that play important roles in the plot, including a system to communicate with dolphins, a memory crystal that mimics the consciousness of a deceased crewmate. So it's got a lot of sci-fi elements in there, but also deals with ecological remediation and reflection on the nature of consciousness and the cycle of life. And of course, high seas adventure as well. Our next story is A Eulogy for Each and Every End. Death is a natural part of life, as you may know. A Eulogy for Each and Every End explores how people in an ecological community in Brazil handle the cultural role of death and the bodies of the dead in a climate-transformed future. The solution they come up with is an elegant combination of ecological remediation and a delicate, personalized honoring of the life story of the recently deceased. I appreciated the gentle reverence for the dead that is shown by the undertakers in this story, the many creative details of the story and setting, the central role of science in the organization of their community. They've got science centers that the whole community is organized around, and the subtle but powerful queer representation, including a hint of polyamory in there, which I appreciated. There's another story, Our Continuity, Each of Us Raindrops. This may be the first climate fiction story that I've encountered that features a telepresence robot as a main character. So you've got someone who is present but in a robot form. They're back home using VR to operate the robot. Two brothers travel across devastated lands of a post-apocalyptic America in search of endangered species to document. One of the brothers travels in person, while the other uses a drone to make the journey, a flying drone. It's a quirky and engaging story about family, technology, American culture, there's even some football in there, and the importance of observing and protecting endangered species while we can. Yeah, come to think of it, I think that's the first climate fiction story I've read that featured football. The next story on the list is Plantains in Heaven. It's the latest in an emerging trend in climate fiction, a trend that explores what life may be like in major cities that succumb to flooding and rising sea levels. When portions of a city become submerged permanently, the residents who lack the wealth or the desire to relocate learn to adapt to the changing conditions. Even as the buildings decay and gradually collapse around them, two young people in this story in West London still find hope and love amidst the ruins. The next story is Tangles in the Weave. This was a really fascinating one. When a species of animals goes extinct, what happens to the animal spirits who no longer have bodies of that species to be reborn into? Tangles in the Weave is a fascinating tale that explores the idea that all living beings are connected through an unseen web of life. Humans in this story can experience a conscious connection with this web, including the spirits of animal species that have gone extinct. This will be of particular interest to spiritually minded readers, but even the readers who are more atheistic or agnostic may find great beauty in the metaphors of the interconnection of this story, just considering the consciousness of extinct species. Got a couple more stories on the list here. The Isle of Beautiful Waters. The Isle of Beautiful Waters is a story about storytelling. A Caribbean family braces for severe weather as hurricanes descend upon the region. Once they've prepared their home and community for the storm, they pass the time by telling stories about their family history and the legends of the island's origins. The result is a powerful blend of climate themes, Caribbean culture, and the relatable and timeless experience of sitting down with loved ones during a storm to tell stories. I feel like I just experienced that here in Southern Illinois during some of our springtime storms that we had. Next story on the list is The Ones Left Behind. What role do family traditions and businesses play in a city and society undergoing dramatic change? The Ones Left Behind is the story of a young woman in New York City running her family's Sichuan restaurant. It's a fascinating exploration of family traditions and connections. The potential connections between restaurants and local ecological growing practices. She gets some of her food from locally grown produce. And the balance between dedication to work life and openness to the tender joys of young love. We've just got a couple more stories on the list here. This View from Here. Urban planning plays a vital role in our response to the climate crisis. In the story This View from Here, it's the story of a young woman who grew up in a small town and decides to move to a faraway city to finish her urban planning program. Wonder if that might be relatable to a lot of people around here. Her love of cities and her desire to make positive contributions to society comes into conflict with her relationship with her father and aunt and her love of the land where she grew up. As I said, that made me think of here in Southern Illinois quite a bit. People making the choices, do I stay in the town that I grew up in, or do I move to a big city to try to make a difference in life there? The next story on the list is To Rescue a Self. In this story, a young woman travels to Lagos for the Green Nigeria Youth Fellowship. Her story explores the history and potential future of Lagos and Nigeria, the importance of documenting and supporting indigenous ways of living and knowing, and it also explores mental health and young love. And it's actually kind of rare in climate stories to see mental health explored to that depth as well. So I was glad to see that representation there. Finally, we've got one last story to mention on the list. We Cast Our Eyes to the Unknowable Now. This story explores the future of Koreatown in Los Angeles. A young woman comes home from work to discover that her teenage sister has disappeared. She discovers that her sister has been secretly working on an ecological remediation project in a large and deep fissure in the ground that opened up in the neighborhood years ago in the wake of an earthquake. So obviously this is set in the future, a very different future, and it's exciting to see the ecological remediation that goes on in that story. And it's a story about family connections as well. So where can you read all of these stories? As I mentioned at the beginning, you can read them at the Imagine 2200 page if you go to grist.org. They've got Imagine 2200 there. They may eventually publish it as ebooks or print books. In the meantime, it's available for free on the website, which is a lovely service that they provide. Now it's time for the Climate Change Reading List of the Week. This week's Climate Reading List of the Week is Climate Change Audiobooks. This one was actually an idea suggested to me by a listener, and I was very glad for the suggestion, and very glad for the listener. So, do you like audiobooks? Audiobooks are a growing market for book publishing in general, and climate change books in particular. Many of the most popular books about climate change are now available in print, ebook, and audiobook formats. This increased availability of climate change audiobooks is especially helpful for readers who prefer audiobooks or can only read audiobooks for accessibility reasons. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do a whole list about this, is it's an important way. Audiobooks are very important in order to be sure that everyone is able to enjoy these books. So this list features some of our favorite climate change audiobooks, including works of climate fiction and climate nonfiction. I have struggled to find climate poetry in audiobook form. It does not seem to be a very common thing. Climate poetry in general is a smaller genre. But I do want to mention some of the fiction and nonfiction titles. I came up with 5 choices in each genre. There's enough of them that it's hard to choose, and I may rotate this list periodically. But we're starting with some classics. And among the greatest classics of climate fiction, we have Parable of the Sower. This acclaimed post-apocalyptic novel of hope and terror from an award-winning author that they say pairs well with 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale, and may even, I would say, may even exceed them in some regards. The updated version includes a foreword by LeVar Burton and an afterword by N.K. Jemisin. When global climate change and economic crises lead to social chaos in the early 2020s, California becomes full of dangers, from pervasive water shortage to masses of vagabonds who will do anything to live to see another day. Now that we're in the 2020s, this was from the 90s, I believe, how does that description sound? Have we realized the future of Parable of the Sower? It's a wonderful book. Octavia Butler, author very much should look into if you haven't already. And it is available in audiobook form. Some other classics, some of these we have reviewed before on the Climate Book Review. Like we've mentioned Parable of the Sower. There's also The Deluge. This book is, simply put, a modern classic. If you read it, you'll never forget it. Prophetic, terrifying, and uplifting. That's a quote from Stephen King about it. And it's a big sprawling, it's one of the long, I think about 800-page books. But they keep you going with the action and the exploration of the different aspects of the characters as they explore the climate crisis. So we'll just get through some more of the titles here. Ministry for the Future is also available in audiobook form. Termination Shock is available as well. Flight Behavior. Some of these are New York Times bestsellers. So I do sometimes focus on the more indie titles, but a lot of these are really established titles if they've got an audiobook available. And as a bonus, the Imagine 2200, they have an audiobook collection on their website, grist.org. You can track down the audiobook version of that. Now, I do tend to give a lot of love to the fiction titles as a fiction author, but I want to mention the nonfiction as well because, well, sometimes reading these climate nonfiction books can inspire us to do great deeds for climate justice. So we need good information in order to do things about the climate. Here are some nonfiction titles that have audiobook forms. All We Can Save. This is a national bestseller. It's provocative and illuminating essays from women at the forefront of the climate movement who are harnessing truth, courage, and solutions to lead humanity forward. We also have The Uninhabitable Earth. That's, as the title implies, it is a much more, morbid exploration of the challenge. But it is also an impassioned call to action. They describe the catastrophe that is going on with the climate crisis, and they encourage people to take action on it. Another classic that's available in audiobook form is Drawdown. Drawdown takes a very unique approach. They explore the 100 most substantive solutions to reverse global warming, based on meticulous research by leading scientists and policymakers around the world. Now, I know, unfortunately, our society is going through a round of defunding scientists, but if you like science and scientists, Drawdown is a wonderful book to read. It helps understand solutions to the climate crisis. We've also got Merchants of Doubt, which explores a lot about how we got here. This book tells with brutal clarity the disquieting story of how a loose-knit group of high-level scientists and scientific advisors with deep connections in politics and industry, ran effective campaigns to mislead the public and deny well-established scientific knowledge for over 4 decades. So this one's close to my heart, partially because it also touches on the tobacco industry. As longtime listeners may know, my father passed away from cancer that was largely due to smoking. And so the same individuals who were peddling disinformation about the health risks of smoking are nowadays peddling disinformation about the climate crisis. So this book, Merchants of Doubt, explores that. And finally, one last book on the list, we have This Changes Everything, available in audiobook form. The most important book yet from the author of the international bestseller, The Shock Doctrine. This is a brilliant explanation of why the climate crisis challenges us to abandon the core free market ideology of our time, restructure the global economy, and remake our political systems. In short, the book argues that we either embrace radical change ourselves, or radical changes will be visited upon our physical world. That is a premise that's talked about a lot in climate movement, climate justice circles. because of what we've done to the atmosphere, things are going to change one way or another. What we have choices in now is what we do to try to help people along the way. So once again, this has been the Climate Change Audiobooks reading list. If you'd like more info on that, you can email me at info@climatebookreviews.com. Thank you for listening to the Climate Book Review. You can find more information about this episode and show at climatebookreview.com. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support the show by telling your friends, giving the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast apps, and of course, donating to WDBX by visiting wdbx.org. Thank you to WDBX for broadcasting this and many other good shows. Thank you to Liborio Conti for the music, and Ed Hawkins for the Warming Stripes graphic we use in our logo. Learn more about that at showyourstripes.info. Finally, thank you to everyone who is reading, writing, and taking action in response to the climate crisis. With our powers combined, we can make climate justice a reality.